Good evening and welcome to Insight. On this episode, we will be discussing the destruction of Islam's holiest sites by the Saudi regime in a conversation with Dr. 𝓷𝔂𝓪𝓵𝓪𝓶. But first, let's take a look at this brief analysis.
How does one begin to understand the historical ignorance of the majority of Muslims regarding the destruction of the religious and historic heritage of Hijaz, the land of Prophet Muhammad, where the Holy Quran was revealed and Islam was established? How many people know that the contemporary kingdom of Saudi Arabia is built upon the ruins of Islam's holiest sites and their destruction at the hands of Wahhabi Takfiri armies led by Abdulaziz ibn Saud, the founder and first king of Saudi Arabia, after his army's conquests of Mecca and Medina in the mid-1920s? Is it a coincidence that at the precise time when the British Empire is destroying the Ottoman Empire, American oil companies are beginning to exploit the massive crude oil reserves in eastern Arabia, and Western Zionists are salivating to establish a colonial Zionist settler state in Palestine, that at the same time, an army of illiterate Takfiri Wahhabi Bedouins conquers the heart of the Muslim world and pulverizes everything of religious and historical value and significance related to Prophet Muhammad, his pure family and companions, and the early history of Islam? How are we to understand the silence of so many Muslims when nearly 100 years later they witness the Najdi Bedouin Saudi conquerors of Hijaz turning Islam's heart and holiest cities into a concrete jungle filled with cheap imitations of Western high-rise hotels, the tower over the Holy Kaaba, and gaudy, ugly shopping malls dedicated to the gods of consumerism and gluttony? It's very likely that the incompetence and inability of many Muslim political leaders to create viable states and economies has made them completely dependent on the handouts of Saudi petrodollars for survival, and apparently has had a negative effect on their ability to learn contemporary history and use their tongues to protest the destruction of Islam's holiest sites, something that is happening right in front of their eyes. The moral impunity and legal immunity granted by the United States, Britain and the Zionist-owned global media to the Saudi tribe is not limited to cases of killing, chopping up, and then dissolving the remains of a dissident journalist in acid, but apparently also extends to the systematic destruction of the history of Islam in Islam's two holiest cities of Mecca and Medina. How do we explain this savagery, this ignorance, this destruction, this silence, and this impunity?
Dr. 𝓷𝔂𝓪𝓵𝓪𝓶, thank you so much for joining us on Insight. I'm very glad we are able to have this conversation, Doctor. We had a recent interview with Dr. Ali Al-Ahmed, who talked about some of the crimes of the Al Saud as it related to the eastern provinces, the Shias, and other areas. And in that conversation, a very interesting issue came up, which I thought is very important that we follow up on and that we talk about, because it's an issue that really is hurting the soul of hundreds of millions of Muslims. And that's the issue of the destruction of the religious, cultural, and historic heritage of Hijaz. Hijaz being the region, of course, where Mecca and Medina are located, the heart of the Islamic world, the land of revelation, the place where Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the companions and the Ahl al-Bayt all originate from and lived. And this is something that you have been, this issue of the destruction is something that you have been talking about for 3 decades. You've been commenting about it, you've been documenting it, and raising your voice about it. And it's very interesting because in this process, we recently had a news item where the Al Saud were announcing that they want to turn It's ridiculous. It's comical. I mean, it's tragic, but you know, sometimes tragedy and comedy are very close. That they want to turn Mecca Medina into a financial hub, into an area of increased business. and a location for increased global business. So if you could please give us your insight, give us a little bit, introduce us into the subject of the destruction that is being done by the 𝓷𝔂𝓪𝓵𝓪 to the religious and the cultural heritage of Hijaz and Mecca and Medina.
First of all, alhamdulillah rabbil alamin wa salatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wa sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ahli baytihi. Thank you very much for having me on Press TV. I'm delighted to be part of Inside program and to give over the sad destruction, the Islamic heritage within Hijaz. I do not like to call it Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is a bid'ah itself, named after the founder. So let's stick to the traditional word, which is Hijaz, as it was known. They have destroyed and wiped out everything what belongs to the Prophet ﷺ, the Ahlul Bayt, and then of course some of the other historical sites, such as Christian churches, which have been there since the Ottoman period. I'll give you examples. Some 30 plus years ago, the Habis or Salafis, that we know them as, a machine which is drilled to demolish anything and everything which is the location, site, not only of the Prophet ﷺ, the Ahlul Bayt, companion, but even his parents. So Sayyidah Amina, the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, is buried in 𝓷𝔂𝓪𝓵𝓪, which is a couple of hours drive from Medina al-Munawwarah. And the pilgrims used to go and visit this site. It's an isolated area, it's a desert, for instance, on top of a mountain, where the Prophet had accompanied her to the sacred journey to visit his blessed father. And I would come to his father's grave a bit later on. What the Wahhabis did 30 plus years ago is they came and actually bulldozed the remains of the grave of Sayyidah Amina. Not only did they bulldoze it, they put kerosene over the grave, burnt it, and then shattered some broken glass all over that particular location. The pilgrims were not able to attend this historical site. And then, on top of that, they built a Fatwa office, or the religious police, at the bottom of this hill or mountain, to harass pilgrims who visit holy site. It's quite sad to hear that when Muslims are so asleep in over the past 300 plus years that we do not have any reaction of this. Yet we are very quick to react when something happens in Al-Quds Sharif, that they are removing a brick, Al-Aqsa or Bayt al-Maqdis, but no one reacted to the bulldozing of the Blessed Mother of the Prophet ﷺ. Let me emphasize that as a Sunni Muslim, this is not a Shia issue. It is a global issue.
Exactly.
And it concerns every single human being who is passionate about heritage. Otherwise, heritage becomes a legend. The difference between the Christians and the Muslims is very clear. As a historian, the Christians claim to have the cloak of Turin, which is, they believe that it was the cloak when Jesus was crucified.
Correct.
There is no evidence of that, although they still believe by that. What we have as Muslims is something much more beautiful and much more in perfection. We have the Seerah al-Nabuwiyyah. The Seerah of the Prophet ﷺ is not engraved in the Hadith of the Prophet or in the Quran, the Mashaf. It is engraved in the soil or the ground. An example is that when the Prophet accompanied his Blessed Mother at a very young age to 𝓷𝔂𝓪𝓵𝓪𝓶 to go to Medina to visit his blessed father, this location the Prophet visited his mother, who fell ill and passed away at that location. So the seerah is embedded in that location.
Correct.
And then when the Prophet lived with Sayyidah Khadija 𝓷𝔂𝓪𝓵𝓪𝓶𝓮𝓽𝓴𝓮𝓾𝓷 radiallahu anha for so many years, and the Quran was revealed in that house when he was laying his blessed head in the lap of al-Mu'mineen. Ya ayyuhal muzammin illa qalila. This is the seerah not only of the house, but embedded in that particular soil that sallallahu alayhi wasallam lived. So if these locations are bulldozed, eventually wiped away, we do not have anything left of these locations but only words and texts. So what remains is a legend, and then we just say, oh well, this is where the Prophet lived, but where's the proof? Where's the existence? It has been wiped away by digging up, dynamiting, and razing it completely without preserving it for generations to come. And that's a very sad fact. So the House of Saud caused this tremendous atrocity in Abwa. They didn't stop there. And then in the early 1970s, they expanded the Prophet's mosque as for today, a Masjid al-Nabawi Sharif. And the Prophet's father was buried in one of his uncle's houses. And it is towards Babu Salam, as we go towards the famous mosques, Masjid al-Imama, Masjid Ali, Masjid Omar, Masjid Abu Bakr. But it was at a very short distance as you step out today from Babu Salam, walking towards outside, a couple of steps, and he was buried in that very location of that house. And that house used to have a well. 𝓷𝔂𝓪 radiallahu anhu, the father of the Prophet, was buried in this location, this particular house. It was bricked up, and it was there under the Ottoman. It was still intact. Took over, 1924, 1925. Prior to this, let's talk about what atrocities they claimed in Karbala, in Najaf. They bulldozed everything there before they came to Al-Hijaz. And then started demolishing Baqi, Al, and so forth. They demolished this particular house where the Prophet's father was buried. And then not only what they did, they exhumed his body. Mm-hmm. And I have many witnesses to see this, and we have a video recording of this lying around somewhere with one of our colleagues. In those days, it was not sophisticated technology. It was made on a handmade reel projector. And when they exhumed his blessed body, it was as if he was performed with the shroud and ghusl and washed his blessed body today. It was still dripping with water, and you could still smell his beautiful fragrance from his blessed body. And then they put him in Jannat al-Baqi without marking the exact location where the blessed body was buried. We know that he's buried slightly behind the blessed grave of Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu. So why do we just ignore these atrocities? Why do we just say, well, I'm sorry, it's happened and we can't do anything about it? What is dangerous is not it has happened. The dangerous thing is what they've caused the Muslim Ummah to feel like go to Ta'ban or relax and say, well, we don't have the authority, we don't have the power. The frightening thing is what is to come. And I will talk about it as we go along, what has happened over several years. As you see at those people who have visited Mecca now, you see this ugly clock tower overlooking the Kaaba.
Exactly.
And this is not Mecca. I don't literally mean it's not Mecca, but in a metaphorical way, it's Mecca-Hatton.
Exactly.
I give example of the Vatican in Rome. Vatican is protected by the sacred law of Rome, that you are not allowed to build any buildings, skyscrapers over and around the particular radius of the Vatican.
Correct.
You're not even allowed to build anything around the White House in Washington. You're not allowed to build anything overlooking the Big Ben in London. But Makkah al-Mukarramah is not any land. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it in the Quran, and He swears by the blessed city. It is a sacred land. It's a sacred sanctuary where you are not allowed to pluck a tree. You're not allowed to kill a bird, insects. As a matter of fact, hunting is forbidden when you are in the sacred sanctuary.
Exactly.
When someone has committed a crime and you enter the hudud, the boundary of the Haram Sharif, you're not allowed to kill that person. You may arrest that person, but you are not allowed to kill him or her. And here we see Mecca being dynamited. The sad fact is the four mountains which surround the Kaaba, Jabal Abu Qabais, Jabal Kaaba, Jabal Omar, Kokanan, these are mentioned in the Quran. And people, the Muslims really need to get to their heritage, understand what the Quran is talking. It's a beautiful book, it's a beautiful religion. And the Quran says that Allah placed the stakes of these mountains into the earth to create a mizan, to balance the earth so it does not imbalance. And the science have realized now, and the books are available, the center point of the universe, no matter where you measure it, from Iran, from Africa, from the subcontinent, from America, the center of the universe is the Kaaba. Now, if these mountains which Allah placed on the earth to stabilize the earth with the mizan as the balance, and then the al-Saud, they placed dynamites over them to blow them up, to build these ugly skyscrapers, and then their towering palaces. What happens is we have turbulations around the world. What do we have? Tsunamis. We have earthquakes. And the reason of course, it's natural, but people don't understand the reason why it's happening, because the mizan, the balance which was placed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has been disturbed. And this causes the imbalance for the tsunamis to occur, earthquakes to take progress. And I give you an example. Jabal al-Omar is a mountain which has been there for centuries. It has been demolished, and the frightening thing was this mountain, every day they would come up with dynamites there to pull the latest hotels there. And then when they come in the morning, the Bin Laden construction company, they realized the rocks have come back again as a miracle. They couldn't believe it. Where the hell does these rocks come back again? So they'll try it again, and it'll happen again. Anyway, they continued with this until they completely raised this mountain, and you have ugly hotels standing there.
Dr. Al-Alawi, so let me go back to what you mentioned, which is that, let's try to analyze this a little deeper, which is you said that the vast majority of the Muslims are quiet about this issue, and we can say that maybe they are scared of the Al-Saud. Of course, the Shias, because they have their issues with the Al-Saud, are the ones that talk about it because of the closeness that they have with the Ahlul Bayt and the family of the Prophet. Maybe they are a little bit more inclined to mention these issues. But would you say that the reason that the majority of the Muslims are not talking about these things is, one, on the one hand, ignorance of these issues, and secondly, because they are actually a little bit scared of the Al-Saud and the money and the power and the influence that they have in the Ummah? Is this a correct analysis of what's happening here?
Well, let me explain. Yes, the Muslims are ignorant of the fact of what has been happening in Hijaz. And yes, the other issue is petrodollars. Petrodollars plays a significant influence on the Muslims. And the example here is in around the world where the Muslim countries, so-called Muslim leaders, i.e. in Pakistan, Morocco, Egypt, these leaders, they have heritage in their country. Egypt has significant Ahlul Bayt shrines there. Imam Shafi, Imam Hussein, Sayyidah Zainab, Sayyidah Nafisat al-Ulum, I can go on. great Sufi shrine, Sheikh Saleh al-Jafri, Sheikh Ibrahim Dasuki, and so forth. The question is that why are Muslims frightened? The reason why they're frightened is because the average Muslim thinks that they will be banned of visiting Hijaz
Right.
to perform the lesser pilgrimage or Hajj.
Correct.
The other issue here is because these countries that I've mentioned are poor countries, and the economy is relying on foreign funds, especially Al Saud, and hence these leaders will not speak about the atrocities what Al Saud has committed. But that should not stop the Muslims living in these countries to convince and a wake-up call to say, hold on, enough is enough. Because, look, I mean, I'll give you an example here since you brought Egypt up. The pyramids in Egypt have been up there for more than 8,000 years, perhaps even more. And the Prophet ﷺ passed away 1,400 plus years ago. Now, they have been up there at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Where did the Prophet say, go and demolish the pyramids because they're pharaonic? Or the Bamayan idols in Afghanistan, where did he say, go and demolish them? Islam does not say you got demolished and wipe its history. Islam says you learn by its previous mistakes and its errors, but you don't demolish them.
Exactly.
So this machinery, I call it the evil machinery of the Wahhabis and of al-Saud and al-Sheikh, it is so evil that it's penetrated in many countries in the world and with their petrol influences and started changing the beliefs of many Muslims, and they think and they realize that perhaps their forefathers who have been praising and visiting these heritage sites have, as a matter of fact, committed bid'ah and dalala and shirk.
Great. So, Doctor, let me stay on this a little bit, and then we can go back, maybe mentioning some more examples, because I think that's good for us to mention for the viewers, you know, the facts, because these are such amazing facts that maybe some are not familiar with it. But before we get to that, it seems to me that there's a connection between the ignorance of the Wahhabi, you know, bid'ah, the Wahhabi ignorance, and the way that the West, the Americans, and the Zionists are weaponizing this. So it kind of fits very well together. On the one hand, you have these Wahhabis who basically took over Hijaz in the 1930s and began this destruction, although the previous Saudi states had done similar things in previous centuries. But at the same time, this allows the enemies of Islam, the Zionists and some of the Western countries, to literally erase Islamic history, and with that, any sort of a deeper, real understanding of Islam that would be then used for Muslims to liberate themselves, to be able to manage their own affairs, to manage their own ummah, and to repel this onslaught that's been coming from the West in the last 200 years. So do you think that there's a connection, that it's not just simply, I mean, that the one element of the Wahhabi ignorance is one element of it, but it is being instrumentalized, weaponized by those countries in order to get the Al Saud to be the head of the spear in a way for destroying real Islam and the knowledge of Muslims about what real Islam is?
Yes, there is some connection by the Zionist regime, and no doubt they've been penetrating there for a very long time. And we must not forget that Al Saud was put up there by the British to get rid of King Hussein and the Ottoman Empire. You know, one of the sheikhs have said, Al-Yahud, Al-Saud. These go together, Yahud and Saud. They are part of the same parcel. I'll give you an example. In the Kaaba, as we look at the Bab al-Kaaba, the door of the Kaaba, and how the Zionists have moved in penetrating this, is the Kaaba itself has the names engraved on of King Abdulaziz and so forth, and some people don't even realize what is engraved. They think it's the Kalam or the Quran engraved of them. Even on the Kiswa, on the Kaaba.
Right. The cloth, that's the cloth that's thrown over the, yes.
Which is draped over the Kaaba.
Right.
It does not have everything which is the words of Allah, of the Quran. it has many calligraphy which is praising King 𝓷𝔂𝓪𝓵𝓪 and the current king and so forth. But let's talk about the door itself, other than the name of the king. There are sun symbols. If you look at the zoom at any of the images, or if you have the opportunity to visit the Kaaba, you'll go and you see the sun symbols on the door of the Kaaba. Now, those sun symbols, there are lines in between reflecting the rays of the sun. There are about 7 lines in between. When we look at these symbols, I was in Syria several years ago, and I was sitting with one of a historian, a friend of mine, and who is an expert on some heritage and some symbols. And suddenly I started this conversation of these sun symbols which I found on the door of the Kaaba, and he was taken back. I was quite shocked. He said, "Are you sure?" And I showed him the image that I had. He said, "Okay, just wait here, Irfan. Let's meet here over coffee and discuss it tomorrow. I want to make sure that I'm going to tell you something which will shock you." He came back the next day and he found that these symbols are with the Masonic symbols related to the Zoroastrianism, which was practiced centuries ago. And so the sun rays is like the sun god.
Correct.
To Zoroastrianism, as well as the Masonic symbols, which are part of the parcel in Masonic lodges that one would go into Freemasons. So that's one issue. But let's talk about how powerful the Zionists have become over just a few years ago. The CCTV cameras that we have operating in the masjid or the 2 harams in Mecca and Medina are controlled by a Zionist company. So, and quite recently, they have a facial recognition system just installed a couple of months ago. Right. So anyone who's entering Masjid al-Haram for Umrah or whatever reason, they are monitoring you at every location, who you are, what you're doing as a facial recognition. And this is being stored on the data by the Zionists in America and in Israel. And the company who installed this, although it was Muslims who installed them physically, but the ones who manufactured them and the idea behind it was by the Zionists. And again...
So, Doctor, excuse me, just to clarify, basically what we have is that when people go for Umrah and for Hajj, basically all the data is being shared or given by the Al Saud to the enemies of Islam, the United States, the Israelis, and this is put into the database. This is then, the facial recognition is put into the database so that any place on earth that this person then goes after that, they are in the database of the Americans and the Israelis. Do I understand you correctly?
Absolutely. And before this, they used to have an iris scan at the airport. When you come to the Matar and they will iris scan you, and they gave up that. Then they used to scan your fingerprint you. They gave up that. So came up with the new technology, which is, of course, to have a facial recognition. But at the same time, let me explain a bit further on this, if I may. Yes. We have the coronavirus, which is the pandemic. Okay, so they put this poison in the house of Saud. They listen, now you need to turn around and have an app put onto your phone. So those who visited the Grand Mosque, Mecca and Makarama and Medina al-Munawwara, they have to download an app. So to go Riyadh al-Jannah, to be able to pray in Riyadh al-Jannah, one could enter at any time and pray there and exit. Now you need to book on an app the time and date that you will visit Riyadh al-Jannah in Masjid Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina. Otherwise, you are not allowed to visit Riyadh al-Jannah. If you go to in Haram Sharif, you know, when you do the circumambulation of the mataf, you are supposed to performing Umrah. You need to have that booked in. And in the Hijr Ismail, which is the small arch next to the Kaaba,
yes,
you're not allowed to pray in there until you have booked a slot on the app to be able to pray there. So the idea here is they are trying to control the Muslims to be able to be, wherever they visit in the holy mosques, what time they're visiting, who is visiting, and on their mobile as well, regardless if it's a Android phone or Apple phone.
Right.
And if I may say so, another issue here is which is a very interesting fact. According to Imam Malik, the Hijr Ismail, which is the arch, and it was a part of the Kaaba, which the Hashemites, when they ran out of money, they could not sort of build the Kaaba from there, although it's still considered to be part of the Kaaba, even though you pray inside it.
Right.
That, according to Imam Malik, is where the Hajra, the wife of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Ismail is buried. Amongst the 70 Anbiya and the Prophets buried in the Mataf area. So the question here is, are the Sauds going to say, okay, well, let's really excavate everything and dig out the graves that we are circumambulating on and around? The Maqam, which is another fact, which before I forget, Maqam is a very, very important location of the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam.
Exactly.
And the idea was they wanted to move this all together. Not very long ago, about 20 plus years ago, they said, well, you know, this is coming in the way of the mataf or circumambulation, so let's just take it away and remove it. This was a bad idea because they realized that people are coming here and praying 2 rak'atayn, 2 cycles of prayer near Maqam Ibrahim just behind it, and they said, oh, this is bid'ah and shirk. So a great Sufi master, he brought this up, Sheikh Mutawalli al-Sharawi, who was a great muhaddis of the Quran. He was a student in al-Qura. When he found out about this, he said, this is not right, this cannot be possible. So he wrote to King Khalid at the time, and he gave his evidence there, because they only had a couple of days left before this idea was to be implemented. And then when it was picked up by the king, he said, okay, let's have a meeting on this. When they discussed this, he said, listen, this was still there at the time of Umar ibn Khattab. Even when there was a flood in around the area, then they moved it away, but they never dared to dismantle it or move it away. And because the Quran says this is the Masalla of Ibrahim, and this is the very rock that he stood on when it was elevated, when he was building and maintaining the Kaaba. And how can you remove something physically when it's mentioned in the Quran? Inna Safa wal Marwa min sha'airillah. These are signs of Allah. You're walking from one side of the mountain to the other. And are you going to say, okay, well, demolish the Safa and Marwa mountains and say, okay, well, do the Umrah or Hajj without? It's impossible. But yes, they are intending to do this. And yes, they have already done it. The Marwa mountain is gone. It's disappeared. Only the Safa mountain is remained. So what is the Muslim going to wait for until they demolish the Kaaba? And we'll move on to that eventually when we go further on.
Okay, doctor. So let me, we have about 10, 15 minutes left. So let's mention some other of the things that they have done. You mentioned the Blessed Father and Mother of the Prophet. You mentioned the fact that the house in which you had the revelation coming to the Prophet, the house of Hazrat Khadija, that was destroyed, and it even hurts to say it, but it turned into a public toilet, that area. We have, of course, all the areas related to Ahlul Bayt. We have Jannat al-Baqi, both Mecca and Medina, all these. If you could, please give us a few more examples, and then I want to talk about, with your permission, a little bit about Hijaz itself, because you are emphasizing that we should call it Hijaz. Hijaz has its own history, has its own identity, has its own culture. Let's talk after that a little bit about Hijaz as well. So if you could, please give us now some more examples of what they've done to destroy this history in Hijaz.
Okay, let's talk about quite a recent one where in 1989 there was we realized that there was a house, or we located the house of Sayyidah Khadija, the wife of the Prophet, again, which I mentioned, they received the Quran. And we realized that it was from the Babel, as we go into the Sa'ir area towards Bab al-Salam, and we exited, this was the location, and we located it and we found it. We went into this particular house after excavating it. We found all the ghurfa, all the rooms intact. As a matter of fact, we even found the Ghurfatul Wahi, where the revelation came by Jibreel alayhi salam to that location. We even found where al-Mu'mineen gave birth to the very location to Fatima radiallahu anha. So, and so the point here is, we wanted to preserve this, and we asked them that we will preserve it and keep it intact for bring a glass layer over it so people can come and see where the Prophet ﷺ lived in a very simple, modest life. They said, no, we cannot allow that. And then eventually we realized we have to do something, so re-excavated after a couple of years when we had the chance. Anyway, we came an idea, we compacted it with clean white sand so that it's not disturbed, and then slabbed it over with marbles. The following year, we realized they came and built 1,400 bathrooms and toilets over that very house, Bayt al-Khadija. And that house is leaking today with sewage because the amount of machinery they put up, which are very, very caterpillar machinery to dig up and excavate, that is fractured that particular location, okay? Number two, I'm going to shock the listeners here, Muslims and non-Muslims. In 1996, there was no Kaaba. The Kaaba was removed brick by brick. All the people were doing is circumambulating some whiteboards in the shape of the Kaaba. And I have many witnesses who have seen this and have gone inside, who were privileged to go inside and pray the 2 rak'atayn. The Hajar Aswad was bought out. And the reason why is because the columns, 3 columns, they said that the bricks of the Kaaba had deteriorated and were causing dampness. There was some insects which were eating the cockroaches, the columns, wooden columns. So therefore it had to be rebuilt. And the bricks had gone back, let's say, about 350 years ago. So they weren't as close as the prophetic periods, but certainly historical. And we found idols in the basement. We found coins, we found idols from that particular period. That could have been preserved in the museums. But what they did, they took all the bricks, they took what we found, and they put them in the black bags, and they made them sink at the port of Jeddah at the Red Sea. The reason being, people will not take the bricks as relics of the Kaaba. So the Kaaba has been, you cannot rebuild the Kaaba because the Kaaba has always been rebuilt by the prophets. You can maintain it, you can look after it, but not demolish it and rebuild it, because it's been built 8 times over history. But this is what Saud has done. Let's talk about the house of Hamza. I used to warn the Muslims that the house of Sayyidina Hamza is on the Shara Ibrahim Khalil Street. It's part of a mosque. Let's protect it before it is razed. And no one believed me. What happened 10 years ago? The house of Sayyidina Hamza does not exist. It's all gone. Even the mosque is taken down. It's all disappeared. So what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for the disappearance of Zamzam, which is very close to be disappeared because of these ugly dynamites which are being penetrated every day to continue building 127 skyscrapers? What we see now is only 10% of what's to come. 10%. And if you're shocked now, imagine what is going to happen the next few years coming down. And Medina is to follow, by the way, because they've already released a plan to build towering skyscrapers overlooking al-Baqi from the top side. So what are we going to do? Are we going to allow them to continue doing this?
Okay, doctor, so let's talk about Hijaz. Let's talk about the Hijazis themselves, because for those who are not familiar with the history, that we have basically the Al Saud having various periods of rule on the Arabian Peninsula, the latest being what's called the third Saudi state. And basically the country which is called Saudi Arabia with this name is established in 1932 when the Najdi Saudis are able to conquer Hijaz and to annex Hijaz. So let's talk a little bit about Hijaz itself and how, because for people who are not familiar, they assume it's just all one thing and one people and one country. So if you could please give us a little bit insight into the culture, identity, and history of Hijaz itself, which is separate from the Al Saud.
Well, you see, if we go back before the House of Saud took over Al-Hijaz, the Ottomans ruled this in a very intact way. Everything was preserved by the Ottomans. Al-Baqi was preserved, and we have images on the screen there. And yes, the big dome, Sayyidah Fatima amongst the Hassan and Zain al-Abidin, Muhammad al-Baqir, Jafar al-Sadiq. So these were all intact. People used to go and visit Al-Baqi, Al-Mu'alla. and all the locations, and have blessed water from the wells of the Prophet's family and the Ahlul Bayt. But the Bedouins, as the Prophet ﷺ said, that there will be camel herders and naked Bedouins who will take over Najd, and this is Riyadh, as we know, by the way. Although they claim this is not Riyadh, this is some part of Iraq and Iran, this is absolutely fabricated lie, because Najd is very clearly mentioned by the Prophet as being Riyadh. And when now Al-Saud conquers Al-Hijaz, as we know it, the first thing that they do is wipe away not the Ottoman heritage. So let's be clear, not the Osmani heritage, not the Abbasi heritage, although the Abbasids have been there as well, but they wipe away the prophetic heritage. They wipe away the heritage which belongs to Islam and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And why? Is because they have been penetrated by the evil machinery that the Tawheed is the only route to Allah, and you cannot have an intermediary. You cannot have Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though he's the messenger, he's Habibullah. You cannot have the Ahlul Bayt of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though Allah says, "O Prophet, your household has been purified." They do not believe in any of this. They said it's only the Quran and the Tawheed. Even the Hadith is fabricated. They consider themselves to be the Hanbalites, or the followers of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. But come on, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, I can give you many quotes that he believed in what we believe in rather than them. So them to be able to come over Hijaz, which was a land of purification, which was land of the Silk Trail, where people would come from China, from the subcontinent, trade from different faiths outside the holy cities. And then you have the frankincense coming in, and as we said, the Silk Route, where people will meet and trade and show interest. And then you got to remember, when this sacred land eventually is taken over Saudi Arabia, they realize this is an opportunity to make money and to be able to live on this surplus wealth. And this is only gifted to them by the Prophet ﷺ. The Uhud is gold itself. So it's not only black gold or oil that they're living on, but they've got gold. And hence they don't have any fear. Plus the extortionate funds they're charging for Hajj and Umrah.
Exactly.
So what happened now, they have started allowing this to build up and accumulate a lot of wealth for the House of Saud, and recently allowed non-Muslims, and I'm talking seriously here, non-Muslims who are Yahudis, who are Christians, who are atheists, to be able to enter Makkah al-Mukarramah, Masjid al-Haram, and Masjid al-Nabawi Sharif, to be able to see what we do there.
We have to clarify, Dr. Alawi, that this is strictly forbidden in Islamic law, in all Islamic schools, that this is something unprecedented in the history of Islam, that there has never been any Islamic school of thought that has allowed this, and yet they are doing this. I just wanted to clarify that.
Absolutely. Makkah al-Mukarramah, Medina Munawwarah is forbidden for non-Muslims to enter. It's mentioned in the Quran. This is the holy sacred sanctuary. And this has been happening quite recently. They've actually done selfies in Masjid al-Nabawi Sharif, in Makkah al-Mukarramah. But the point is, this was to come. And the Muslims should have had a wake-up call. When you have Hardee's, when you have McDonald's,
exactly,
which have been there flourishing for several years, did they really think they will not allow the non-Muslims to come over there? I mean, Paris Hilton, for God's sake, she opened the Hilton complex, the lavish style hotels there.
Did she bring her dog?
Yes. Now she wanted to open there.
Yes.
Launch the hotel. Yes. These are the puppets of the West, of the Zionist regime. The point here is, this is pure land. And let me make myself clear here. The holy sanctuary is not only located around the Kaaba. I have a map which shows the boundaries of the Haram, which goes vast past the boundaries that we have to Masjid Aisha or Miqat. As a matter of fact, some of the historians have said the whole sanctuary goes all the way to Jeddah. All the way to Jeddah. You're not able to enter because, don't forget, Maqbara al-Hawa, where the first female created by Allah, Eve, is buried, and even that grave is demolished. So let's not just say, oh well, Mecca is the only sacred precincts. Right. No, it goes all the way from Jeddah all the way to Medina al-Munawwara, except Najd, which is Riyadh.
Okay, Doctor, so we've come to the end, but I want to end in a little bit of a hopeful note. Maybe we can look into the future. Maybe one day, if the Al Saud are no longer ruling there, do we have the documents, the maps, the drawings, maybe even older pictures of how it was, how Mecca, Medina, and the areas that you were describing, how they are, so that maybe one day we can reconstruct and rebuild this heritage the way it was originally, in its original form? Is this possible?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in my collection, in our library of the Islamic heritage, we have 45,000 images. Some of the images have never been accessed by the public.
Very good.
We have the Ottoman, the rulers who actually sanctioned professional photographers to be able to take photographs of the Masjid al-Nabawi and the Haram Sharif.
Very interesting.
You know, sacred albums by them. But let's talk about the realistic idea to bring back this lost heritage. Mm-hmm. We have engineers from Egypt, we have engineers from Iraq, Iran, we have scientists, we have blueprints of these locations, we have maps where, for example, the wells were, and then they were taken away and concreted. We can rebuild Mecca. As a matter of fact, we can rebuild Mecca even in a 3D model in any
Correct.
country we like. That's how sophisticated it is. And what we have been doing now, just for our viewers, is we've made a navigation system which is called the Hijra route, and one can load it onto their mobile, although it's not immediately available, and you can actually follow the Hijra route from Mecca all the way to Medina al-Munawwara, where he settled, where he prayed, where he sat. And so what we want is people to follow that seerah of the Prophet ﷺ from his birthplace to Amina and always passing away to Medina. And yes, we have the Rawda Sharif or the Hujra Sharifa of the Prophet ﷺ from inside. Again, which I should remind our leaders, the Green Dome is under threat. I'm not saying that it's going to be threatened by demolition of the Green Dome, which they want to demolish anyway.
Yes, we have it also here on the screen here.
Yes. When I went inside the Hujra Sharifa, the columns inside are deteriorating. Mm-hmm. The house of Fatima is allocated next to the house of Aisha, as you know. Correct. The columns are deteriorating. They are not maintaining them. And if you look at a professional machine and scale on the model of the Green Dome, it is slanting down. It's not on the level.
Correct.
Because it's very, very old. It's ancient. And they want it to collapse. They will not allow us to maintain the Hujra Sharifa from inside. We're not saying to touch or disturb the graves. Those are enclosed with the wall. But we want to maintain the house of Fatima and the enclosure inside, which is in a derelict state. So we have everything of that, how it was prior to the Ottoman age. But we can do it. But we need the support of the Muslim and the non-Muslim world to be able to do that.
Okay, Dr. Irfan Al-Alawi, thank you so much for joining us on Inside. Inshallah, in the future, we can continue this discussion and move towards one day reconstructing the real Islamic heritage that existed in Hijaz. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
So what insight did we gain from our conversation with Dr. Al-Alawi? Despite the ongoing destruction of Islam's holiest sites at the hands of the ignorant Wahhabi Saudi regime, there are those in the Muslim world trying to save this holy heritage, Sunni and Shia, both cooperating as brothers for this noble goal. It's a compound problem in that, first, there is massive ignorance about this ongoing crime, and second, when the facts are known, there is a sense of powerlessness to stop it, given the Saudi regime's influence and power. Muslim individuals fear that they will not receive visas for the Hajj pilgrimage if they speak out against this destruction. And governments in Muslim countries fear that the supply of Saudi petrodollars will be cut off. It is here where we have to ask ourselves, what would we answer God and His Prophet, peace be upon him, in the next world, when asked why we remain silent as we witnessed the destruction of this holy heritage? Right in the era of human history when the Ottoman Caliphate, which served as a guardian of Holy Hijaz, is destroyed, and the British, Americans, and Zionists begin to conquer the Muslim heartland centuries after the Crusades, right in this era we see that the most ignorant and violent Bedouin tribes of Arabia are given royal titles, petrodollars, and weapons, with which they set out to literally destroy the physical history of Islam. Who benefits from this destruction? Who benefits when Muslims are forever separated from the physical history of their religion and Prophet and his holy family and righteous companions? How is it that the most fundamental affairs of the Muslim Ummah are given over to the most ignorant tribes, and the two holiest cities of Islam are turned into third-rate imitations of the West's worst architectural filth? We pray for the liberation of Holy Hijaz from the occupation of the ignorant tribes, and God willing, the reconstruction of the religious heritage of Islam by the hands and sincere hearts of all devoted Muslims from every corner of the Muslim Ummah. Thank you for joining us on this episode. Until the next time, on Insight.